Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto Multiverse 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto awakened as the Demon King after Team 7's betrayal and built a powerful harem Part 1? And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Ba-chan, roared the voice of Konoha's loudest resident, as he stormed into the office of the most powerful ninja in the village, his obviously furious and disheveled appearance causing the older blonde woman to skip her usual tirade at the genin's lack of manners. What's happened, Naruto? She asked, her recently awakened maternal instincts kicking into high gear as she realized just how beat up the boy she'd come to think of as her son was. His usually pristine jumpsuit was practically in taters and soaked in blood, that she really hoped wasn't his. His face had a few scrapes and bruises, but they were healing quickly thanks to the fox's chakra. They've gone too damn far this time. I've put up with all kinds of shit from them in the past, but they crossed the line. He yelled as he paced back and forth, shocking the Hokage as she'd never heard him use such language before. Naruto, calm down and tell me what happened. I can't help you if I don't know what's wrong. She pleaded, hating having to see her son in such a state and not knowing why. Naruto looked at her for a few moments in an evaluating manner, before he took a few deep breaths and slumped into one of the chairs in front of the woman's desk. It started when I went to meet with the team this morning. Flashback. It was 8 a.m. as Naruto Uzumaki strolled up to Team 7's designated meeting place, a small wooden bridge on the edge of town. Outwardly he was smiling, but on the inside the young blonde was being torn up inside. For the past few weeks things had been very tense within his team, even more so than usual. It had been brewing for weeks, especially after the Oto Suna invasion at the Chunin exams. The team's dark-haired Avenger had been furious that his blonde dead last teammate had, again, defeated an opponent that he, a supposed Uchiha elite, could not. The first time had been during the mission to Wave, when Naruto destroyed the ice user that had effortlessly beaten down the Uchiha, leaving him in a temporary, near-death state. Sasuke had been able to pass this off as luck or a simple fluke, mostly because he is too excited about awakening his Sharingan to think about much else. But then, in the Forest of Death, the Dobi showed him up again, this time openly criticizing him and calling him a coward before doing battle with what turned out to be one of the legendary Sannin, Orochimaru. Again, he had managed to ignore the insult, as he was preoccupied with first the curse seal, and then training for the finals. But when he had been rescued by the blonde after the monster Gaara had decimated him, he had nothing to distract him. Nothing to draw his ire away from his teammate, and so, as he sat, stewing in his hospital bed, the rage and disgust at both Naruto and himself continued to fester and grow. The Avenger's anger finally boiled over when Naruto had come to visit him, acting as cheerful and lighthearted as ever, like nothing had changed between them, but it had. And it was something that would change the history of Konoha forever. At first, it had started as a mere spar on the hospital roof. Quickly though, it escalated to an all-out battle as Sasuke's fury took over and he attempted to remove his blonde obstacle, permanently. Fortunately, Kakashi had stepped in at the last minute and scalded the boys for their recklessness, his disappointment clearly evident, though it had little effect on the brooding Uchiha, who just felt as though Naruto had, once again, shamed his great name. That had been a week ago, but things had not improved. The teens were constantly at each other's throats, usually as a result of Sasuke's cutting and degrading comments, that seemed to affect the blonde far more than they ever had in the past. On several occasions, Kakashi had been forced to step in to prevent another altercation, and the cycloptic Junin had had enough. After their last scuffle he had warned the boys that next time he would be placing them both on report, something which would be a serious mark against their names, and a great hindrance to their progression as shinobi of Konoha. So, Naruto had decided that he would simply increase the intensity of his idiot mask. It had helped him in the past when things with the villagers had escalated to dangerous levels, and he hoped that it would help him to avoid conflict in his current situation. Fate and a certain Uchiha, however, seemed to have different ideas. The blonde's bright smile slipped slightly as he noticed that neither of his teammates were at the bridge when he arrived, which was unusual considering both had a tendency to arrive early. His shinobi sixth sense began to tingle and the blonde subtly slipped into a ready position, not wanting to alert any potential attackers that he was onto their plan. He was, therefore, only slightly caught off guard when a barrage of kunai emerged from the nearby forest, forcing the team to leap backwards to avoid being repeatedly skewered. Scanning the trees for the source of the attack, Naruto's carefully constructed mask shattered when he saw both his teammates standing with proud smirks on their faces. "Sakura-chan, what the hell? Why are you throwing kunai at me?" he yelled, pain at being betrayed by the girl he had doted on for years burning him more than any physical wound. "Why? Because you are nothing but a filthy demon. That's why. I've finally been told the truth, you horrible monster. And now Sasuke-kun and I are going to finish what the Yondaime tried to do all those years ago, then we'll be heroes and Sasuke-kun will finally be given the respect and acknowledgement he deserves." Sakura yelled, shattering the tormented boy's fragile heart. For years, he had built walls around himself to keep back the pain and suffering that his cursed life generated, only letting a very select few people peek within those barriers to see the truth that lay within. And in an instant they were ripped away. The years of merciless scorn and torment, of brutal physical and emotional abuse, of debilitating, soul-shattering loneliness swept over the boy like a raging flood. And leading them all was his newest pain, the betrayal of the only person he had ever allowed himself to love romantically. The one person amongst his age group that he had thought for sure would accept him regardless of what he held, had scorned him, just like all the rest. He couldn't fight back the tears that flowed from his eyes as his mind was overloaded with all that he had held back throughout his short, but agonizing life. Eventually, however, one thing began to rise above the rampant tempest that was his current emotional state: rage. Ever since the day he was born, Naruto had been battered by hatred and disgust and fear, and once, when he was finally old enough to understand what was happening, he had lashed out against those that had wronged him. He had brutally beaten two much older boys that had been attacking him for using the slide at the public park. By the time he had finally been pulled off them, he was covered in blood, his knuckles were scraped and bleeding, his clothes were dyed red from the spatter that erupted from the children as he pummeled them even after they had long lost consciousness. When he had finally calmed down, his rage was replaced by fear and horror, not from the adults that were screaming at him for hurting their angels, but at himself. He had realized something terrifying at that moment: he loved blood. The feeling of it as it spattered on his face and clothes. The smell of it that lingered in his nostrils even after the Anbu had taken him away and rinsed him off. The image of it, flowing and coating the two helpless boys as they lay, broken and destroyed in the middle of the crowded park. He was absolutely intoxicated by it, and that fact scared him more than anything he had ever experienced before. On that day he had vowed to never let his anger get the best of him, out of fear that it would bring back that horrible beast that he had become when it did. And for almost a decade, he had succeeded. Even during his darkest times, his enraged fight with Haku, the frenzied attack on Orochimaru, and even his brutal battle with the demonized Gaara, he never once let himself go completely. But now the dam had broken and he was once again basking in the exhilarating freedom that came with completely letting go of your emotions. Before either of his young attackers could realize what had happened, Naruto had vanished, only to reappear in front of them, barely 5 feet separating the literally glowing blonde from his surprised and frightened teammates. "You have no idea what you have just done," the Jinchuruki growled, his tone displaying a terrifying mix of absolute rage and contemptuous amusement. "And what is that Onidobi?" Sasuke taunted, his Uchiha arrogance too far powerful to be overwhelmed by the terror assaulting his system at the moment. Naruto's eyes never once left the quivering form of his former love, as he raised his tightly clenched fist towards the Uchiha. "You've set me free," he answered calmly, which again, only proceeded to freak out his teammates more. "Why, you're the Kyuubi?" Sakura stuttered, all of her previous bravado long since dissolved as the reality of the situation became apparent. "Idiot, he always has been the Kyuubi, he's just finally showing his true colors." "Isn't that right, you demon scum?" Sasuke taunted, though his confidence in the situation had also notably decreased. "Me, the Kyuubi, and they call me the dead last," Naruto muttered, giving a grin that was a far cry from the good-natured ones of times past. This one was overflowing with contempt and hatred. "I am the container of the Kyuubi, you fucking moron. If I was the real thing, don't you think that I would have slaughtered all of you vile, hate-filled cretins years ago? No, it is not the Kyuubi you've awakened, it is the real Naruto Uzumaki, and for you too, that is much worse." Sakura's eyes widened in both fear and confusion, whilst Sasuke's smirk regained some of its confidence. "And what could you possibly do to us? Even Sakura can beat you. What makes you think you stand a chance?" His voice was cut off as the air was driven forcibly from his lungs, shortly before he was violently launched into a tree that had been over 20 feet away. What the hell happened? The fallen Uchiha thought frantically as he gasped for air. He hadn't even seen the blonde move, but he could plainly see that Naruto was standing where he had been, with his clenched fist extended. "You punched me," Sasuke yelled, though due to his lack of breath, it came out as more of a gasping yelp. "Wow, impressive insight. Did you come up with that all by yourself, or did someone give it to you like they always do?" Naruto taunted as he lowered his hand and stood in a relaxed position. "You son of a bitch. I'll kill you," Sasuke roared as he got to his feet and charged his teammate, kunai in hand. Naruto avoided the enraged Uchiha's attacks effortlessly for a few moments before catching his wrist and squeezing till they all heard a sharp snap and the kunai fell from the limp hand. Sasuke gritted his teeth to contain the pained scream that was desperately trying to break free from his throat. This is the legacy of the mighty Uchiha clan. PFF'd. I've seen more impressive kittens, and they aren't given even 1/100th of the advantages you are. Where is that genius intellect? Where is your superior Uchiha genes? Where is your all-powerful Sharingan? Naruto taunted, before kicking Sasuke in the chest, sending him careening back into the same tree as before. Tell me, Sakura, is he really that much greater than I am? Is he that much stronger? Or smarter? Or better looking? Please tell me, because, from where I'm standing, it looks like I've got your precious Sasuke-kun beat in every single way. So why is it that you and all the other pathetic whores of our class threw yourselves at this arrogant sack of inbred clan shit?" Naruto sneered, his hauntingly intense sapphire eyes burning a hole in hers with their unyielding gaze. Sakura was speechless. As recently as 2 days ago, if anyone, especially Naruto, had posed such a question to her, she would have literally beat her answer into their skulls. But after what she had just seen and heard, what could she say? Was the Uchiha stronger? Obviously not. Was he smarter? Apparently not, since he had picked a fight with what he thought to be demon, who he knew was stronger than him. Was he even better looking? Taking a hard look at the two teens before her, she was shocked with what she saw. Sasuke's pale and rather demented features were completely overshadowed by the passionate, exotic looks of the sun-kissed blonde, even in his stupid orange outfit, though if what she had been told was true, then he probably didn't have much of a choice about that anyway. His last question hit her like a blow from the goddess herself. Why did she, and everyone else, chase after Sasuke? He wasn't attractive, he's smart but not practically so, he's supremely arrogant and has never displayed anything but scorn and contempt for everyone around him, even his superiors. The shocking truth finally leveled itself in the pink-haired girl's mind. There is no justifiable answer for how she and her classmates had acted. It was petty, foolish and incredibly shallow, and it cost them all greatly. Of the 30 students that graduated from their class, only 5 were females, and all of them were at the absolute bottom of the ranks for the practical skills. The only thing any of them achieved in was the theoretical and academic aspects, all of which had proven completely useless the moment they stepped foot outside of the academy grounds. I don't, she muttered weakly, falling to her knees as she realized she had wasted literally half her life. I thought so. At least you can finally see the truth, he said as he turned away from the sobbing girl. Don't turn your back on me, you fucking monster. Sasuke yelled as he again charged Naruto with his kunai drawn. Before he had even taken 3 steps, the Uchiha felt crippling pain in his healthy wrist as Naruto savagely kicked it, his chakra-enforced blow more than enough to shatter the bones. The blonde then landed a brutal spin kick to his head, fracturing his jaw and once again sending him flying through the air. This time though, the assault did not let up, as the ferocious Jinchuruki appeared behind the airborne Avenger, driving his knees into his back, forcing even the stoic Uchiha to let out a scream of agony. Launching his attacker up off his knee, Naruto proceeded to pummel the arrogant genin mercilessly for more than a minute, before finally letting his broken and battered form fall limply to the ground. Remember this lesson well, Uchiha. Choose your enemies very carefully, cause not everyone will stand by as you tread on them. Naruto crouched down, bringing his head close to that of the barely conscious Avenger. Consider this your warning. Cross me again, and I will bathe in that famous Uchiha blood of yours. Naruto threatened darkly, the almost giddy anticipation in his tone at the mention of his blood sent shivers down Sasuke's bruised spine. Get away from the Uchiha demon! Yelled a new voice as a dozen Anbu appeared from nowhere, surrounding the teens. Naruto looked up at the new arrivals and almost burst with hatred as he saw their blank face masks. The blonde knew all too well what that meant. Taking another anonymous mission without the Hokage's permission, It's been a while since any of you tried this one. So who put you up to it this time? The villagers. The council. Naruto chuckled when he saw one of them flinch slightly at that. The council, huh? That takes me back. Those guys haven't tried a direct attack for nearly 5 years, though since the Sandaime is gone, I'm not really surprised. He shook his head as he stood up to face the squad of shinobi, all of whom could probably beat him in a one-on-one fight, let alone all 12. For attacking and grievously wounding a fellow shinobi of Konoha, you are hereby sentenced to death, with the execution to be carried out immediately. The same voice declared, causing Naruto's rage to increase even more. You planned this. You told Sasuke and Sakura about the Kyuubi because you knew they'd attack me, and either they'd kill me or I'd wound them, giving you an excuse to finish the job yourselves. The blonde growled, his body literally trembling from his intense anger. The masked men said no more as they drew their swords and moved to attack the blonde genin. He managed to avoid the first few swipes, and even took one out with a lucky kick that broke his neck, but it wasn't long before his body was being torn apart by the ruthless slaughter. After some time the attack stopped and Naruto fell weakly to his knees, the pain and blood loss killing him, even as his wounds healed surrounded by a faint red glow. He managed to lift his head as one of the men stepped forward, his sword raised to remove the boy's head, a wound not even the Kyuubi could heal. Surprisingly, Naruto did not feel the fear or even the anger that one would assume he would in such a situation. Instead, the blonde allowed himself to be lost in the strange soothing sensation that had started shortly after the attack begun. He had no idea what it was, or where it was coming from, but he didn't care. It felt like the comfort he yearned for when he was younger. It felt like the family hugs he saw children getting when they were upset. It felt like everything he could ever need, and he was more than happy to lose himself to that feeling as his suffering finally drew to a close. He closed his eyes as he waited for the inevitable, reveling in the peace that had somehow settled over him. Suddenly though, the feeling was gone, instantly cut off, leaving in its wake only the rage and sorrow and hatred that had so recently overwhelmed the boy's tortured soul. His eyes snapped open. He would not die with this feeling in his heart. He would continue to live, continue to struggle, until he regained that peace he had momentarily grasped. Only then, only when he had recovered whatever that feeling was, would he allow himself to leave this world. Staring his death defiantly in the eyes, he felt new power surge through his body, the intensity and concentration of the power matched only by what he felt when using the Kyuubi's chakra, though the feel of this power was different. The Kyuubi's demonic chakra was loaded with animalistic, uncontrolled rage, but this, whatever it was more controlled, more focused. Also, unlike the Kyuubi's chakra, which was clearly coming from an outside source, this power was his, it came from within him, and it came for one thing, blood. Whatever the hell this power was, it yearned for blood like a desperate junkie looking for a fix. Naruto had no idea what he was supposed to do with the blood once he got it, all he knew was that he needed it, now. The lead Anbu grinned widely behind his mask as he brought his ninjutsu down, aiming to remove the head of the demon brat and finally avenge the deaths of his friends and family. His smirk vanished however, when his blade was stopped, caught in the hand of the boy he was trying to execute. He was shocked to find that he couldn't bring his sword free, even as the blood poured from the boy's hand. His shock turned to horror as he noticed that the blood from the wound wasn't falling to the ground, or even trailing down the genin's arm, it was traveling up the blade and onto his hands. "What the fuck are you doing, demon?" he yelled, desperately trying to free himself from the blonde's grasp as the blood began to encircle his hands. The blonde said nothing, as everyone, himself included, watched in fascination and horror as the blood began to visibly tighten its hold on the man's hands, to the point that there was an audible crack, followed by a scream of pain from the Anbu leader. The blood is acting just like Gaara's sand, Naruto thought, the intense bloodlust temporarily overwhelmed by curiosity. I wonder what else it can do. As if reacting to his thoughts, the blood suddenly relinquished its hold on the man's mangled hands, and leapt back to Naruto, spreading over his right shoulder like a second skin. What the foo? The man tried to exclaim, but was cut off as a spike impaled him between his eyes, shattering his mask and killing him instantly. Staring at the spike intently, Naruto was somehow both shocked and not surprised that it had stretched out from his bloody shoulder. The death of their leader seemed to snap the other Anbu out of their trances as they all took up their fighting stances, with a few of the more reckless ones charging the blonde directly. Naruto's eyes widened in fear, then amazement as the blood spike dissolved back into his shoulder and was joined by the copious amounts of his blood that had been staining his clothing. The increased volume allowed the blood to spread, covering everything from his ribs to his shoulders, front and back. Not bothering to consider this development, the attacking Anbu were caught off guard as the blood lashed out at them, defending perfectly against the multitude of attacks the highly trained shinobi were showering on the boy. Snapping out of his own stupor, Naruto decided to go on the offensive and charged one of his masked attackers, picking up the defeated leader's sword as he ran. His strikes were amateurish at best, but his unpredictability, stamina and intoxicating bloodlust were more than enough to overwhelm the more experienced swordsman. Within moments, the masked nin fell, a gaping slash flowing with blood in his throat. Naruto barely spared the man a glance, too caught up in his quest for blood to realize he had just made his first kill. He found his blood defense had defeated two more Anbu that had apparently tried to attack while he was distracted, only to find themselves gravely wounded and missing limbs as the blood skin formed blades and lashed out at anyone that came close, defending him, even from projectile attacks, without the genin even thinking about it. The defense is automatic, like the Suna demon from the Chunin exams. One of the Anbu yelled after having a barrage of kunai aimed at the boy's blind spot deflected harmlessly by blood blades. This discovery managed to enter Naruto's mind through the lusty haze and brought a wicked grin to his face as he remembered how difficult it had been for anyone to get past his fellow Jinchuruki's sand defense. His grin only served to unnerve the already rattled Anbu further, which was key in their eventual downfall. As the battle continued and more of the masked nin fell without the blonde sustaining so much as a scratch, their attacks and defenses became increasingly sloppy, leaving a plethora of openings, all of which the blonde was all too willing to exploit. Only 10 minutes after the bloody battle began, it was over, and Naruto stood in the clearing, surrounded by the bodies, intact or otherwise, of 12 Anbu. Once the battle ended and his bloodlust ebbed, the blonde was somewhat surprised that he was not disgusted by the gore-filled scene that lay around him. Rather, he found himself intoxicated by the presence of all that blood, as he was all those years ago after his first slaughter, only this time, he wasn't afraid of the feeling, rather, he was fascinated by it. Why am I so attracted to blood? Is it because of the fox or is it due to whatever this weird blood power is? And where the hell did that power come from anyway? I've never been able to do that before, why and how has it awakened now? And what the fuck was the council thinking? Sending Sakura and the Tem as bait to lure me into a trap, those manipulative bastards have gone too damn far this time. He declared mentally as he set off towards the Hokage Tower, absently noting that Sasuke and Sakura had disappeared before the start of the fight. Flashback end. And then I came straight here. Naruto finished, leaving a heavily frowning Tsunade to stare at him in silence. The older blonde was awash with a flood of contrasting emotions. She was suspicious and angry at the council and the Uchiha, she was saddened and concerned for her surrogate son, and she was frightened and amazed at the new ability the blonde had awakened and its possible implications. Letting out a long sigh, she turned and looked out the window towards the Hokage monument. What would you do, sensei, grandfather, granduncle, Minato? She asked internally, letting her thoughts wander to the great men that had preceded her and how they would have dealt with such a situation. After a few minutes, she turned back to the blonde, who was trying to control the blood that still covered his upper body. I think it'd be best if you left the village for a while, she said calmly, though her expression was anything but. Naruto sighed and nodded, surprising the older woman. I was thinking the same thing. It may not be safe to have me in the village until I get whatever this thing is, under control. And I could defiantly use a break from the villagers and all their bullshit, plus the council won't be able to do shit if I'm not in the village. Tsunade nodded in agreement, shocked by how well the boy was dealing with the situation, though she hid it well. The timing is actually quite good. Jiraiya will be returning from a mission in a few days, you can go along with him. Hell, I can probably convince him to take you as his apprentice. As much as I appreciate the offer, Ba-chan, I would prefer to go alone. I've never really had time to be by myself and think about who I am and what I want, without having someone around hassling me or interrupting. I think a trip by myself will be a great help to me figuring out some important things. Plus, the idea of spending a few years with that pervert sounds about as appealing as handing myself over to the villagers, bound and gagged. He said dryly, earning both a chuckle and a frown from the conflicted woman. Okay, Naruto. I'll mark it down as a S-rank reconnaissance mission, so nobody will be able to find out where you are or what you're doing. That should keep those pricks on the council off you, at least until you come back. Naruto smiled warmly and gave the busty woman a loving hug as she rose to see him out. Thanks so much for this. And I want you to know that if I ever had a mother, I would want her to be exactly like you. I love you, Ka-chan. He said softly, as both of them began to cry. I love you too, Naruto-kun. Be sure to keep yourself safe out there. I don't think I'd be able to cope if I lost you too. She pleaded desperately. Naruto pulled back from their embrace and looked into his mother's teary hazel eyes. I promise you, on my dreams and everything that I hold precious, I will return to you. He declared, his voice filled with nothing but love and determination. Tsunade only nodded, not trusting her voice anymore, as the young blonde embraced her one more time and left her office, soon to be leaving her village in her protection. The thought of him alone in the world scared her immensely, but in her heart she knew that no matter what happened in the world, her son always keeps his promises. He would be back, and until that day she would wait and prepare, determined to make the young blonde's life better, and she knew just where to start. Shizune, she yelled, summoning her teary-eyed assistant, who had no doubt been listening in on the conversation. Hi, Tsunade-sama, the dark-haired woman said as she bowed to her longtime master and companion. Bring me all the hospital records for the 3 months leading up to the Kyuubi attack, as well as all of Naruto-kun's medical files. I'm going to find my son's parents. It had been more than 3 years since had begun rejoicing the sudden departure of their resident demon. Well, most of them did, there were a select few that missed the blonde troublemaker greatly. Amongst them were the Godime Hokage and her assistant, the boy's adoptive mother and sister, the Konoha 12-Sasuke, who were his peers and friends, and the owners and operators of a particular ramen stand, whose business had plummeted nearly 50% in the boy's absence. All of them waited anxiously for the day when he would return, all of them silently cursing the Hokage, who had not thought to put a time limit on the Genin's mission. It started like any average spring afternoon for the people of Konoha, but that was soon to change, as after 3 years, 2 months and 15 days, Uzumaki Naruto had returned to the village hidden in the leaves, and he didn't come back alone. Azumo and Kotetsu sat at their post in front of the main entrance to their home village, kicking themselves for having woken the Godime from her afternoon nap, the particular mistake that had earned them gate duty for a month. To pass the time, the two incredibly bored Chunin had begun playing I Spy. That was 3 hours ago. Now, Azumo, the slightly less moronic of the pair, was becoming increasingly fed up with his partner's incessant continuing of the childish game. Oh, I've got a good one. I spy, with my little eye, something beginning with. God damn it, Kotetsu, if you use tree one more time, I swear I am going to rip your he. It's not trees this time, it's something new. Something beginning with F, the blue-haired man announced proudly. Sighing and deciding he could humor his longtime friend one more time, Azumo looked around. Foliage? He asked, pointing to the trees lining either side of the road. No, it's got nothing to do with trees. What the hell starts with F? He yelled, his patience for the game having run out a long time ago. Kotetsu smirked victoriously. Freaky red guy, he stated, pointing towards 3 figures that had just become visible down the road, the middle one of which was wearing all red. First of all, you can't use adjectives in I spy, that's cheating, you jackass. Second, just because a guy wears all red, doesn't make him freaky. In our business you can't judge people by how they look. Think about Guy, if you just looked at him, you'd think he was a demented idiot who. Guy is a demented idiot. Kotetsu replied flatly. Regardless, you can't judge someone just by how they look. Say what you want, that guy is freaky, look at him. Kotetsu declared. Azumo sighed again before taking a better look at the red man. He was a little taller than average, about 6 feet if he had to guess. He had shaggy blonde hair, with blood-red streaks running through it that hung loosely around his head, almost covering his eyes. His clothes, for the most part, looked be standard-issue shinobi gear, long, loose pants, a tight long-sleeve shirt, and average sandals. The only things that made him stand out were the heavy cloak draped over his shoulders, the mask covering the lower half of his face, and the fact that all of the clothes were crimson, and if you looked closely at them, almost looked like they were composed entirely of a liquid, rather than any fabric, making it look eerily like he was wearing an outfit made entirely of blood. Okay, he is freaky. What the hell is with those clothes? Azumo asked quietly, since the travelers were now within hearing range. They are part of my Kekkei Genkai. Freaky Red Man answered as they strode up to the check-in station. Both Chunin jumped at the man's deep, gravelly voice. If they were women, they may very well have swooned at the sound. Really? And what Kekkei Genkai is that? I've never heard of one that involves clothes before. Azumo asked, putting on his serious face in front of the strangers. You don't need to know. Now, if you don't mind, we need to be going. We have an appointment with the Hokage. Answered the person on Freaky Red Man's left, whose voice revealed her to be a woman, even though nothing could be seen under the heavy cloak and mask that she wore. All that could be seen was her very long, crimson hair, that reached the entire length of her back. That, combined with the silky, almost regal sound of her voice, instantly led the Chunin to decide that she was both very hot and very important. I understand the need for secrecy, but all travelers must give their names and purpose of visit before entering the village. Azumo stated firmly, standing up to try and look more intimidating, though it clearly didn't work since the newcomers didn't even twitch. Look, you fucking piece of shit, we don't have to answer any of your fucking questions if we don't want to. Now fuck off, we have to see the blonde bitch. The third traveler cursed loudly, her voice also revealing herself to be a woman, though the contrast between her and the other female was like black and white. Her tone was sharp and grating, like someone who had grown up on the streets, as opposed to her companion, who sounded like she was raised in a castle or manor. Her hair, though not too dissimilar to the other woman's shade and length, was obviously less taken care of, as it was rougher and more untamed. Tayuya, calm down. We are all friends here, there is no need to be so hostile. The man reproached calmly, making the rude redhead take a deep breath and step back from the table. I apologize for my friend, she has a hard time trusting new people. As for our names, this is Tayuya-chan, and Akai-chan, and my name is Uzumaki Naruto. Both men visibly flinched at his name, and both of the woman tensed, as if expecting an attack. I assume that you have returned from your mission then, Uzumaki-san. Kotetsu said, the reverence in his voice completely unexpected. That is correct. So if you wouldn't mind letting us through, I would like to make my report, he said, unable to keep the confusion and suspicion out of his voice. Of course. Please go right ahead. I'm sure Hokage-sama will be most happy to know that you have returned. Azumo said as he waved them through. The three travelers spared one final wary gaze towards the strange Chunin before entering the village. A short time later, the three red travelers arrived at the Hokage Tower and were met with similar reactions from the staff as they gave their introductions. Wanting to get to the bottom of what was going on, Naruto almost yelled in joy as he set eyes on the familiar face of the Hokage's personal assistant and companion. Shizune Nichan, he called as he bounded up to the woman and wrapped her up in a tight hug, nearly scaring her half to death as she hadn't recognized who was embracing her. Hey, let me down this instant, she yelled, struggling against the large man's powerful hold. Naruto let her down gently and looked at her with sadness and confusion. Shizune Nichan, aren't you happy to see me? It only took a moment for the woman to realize who it was that was looking down at her, his sapphire blue eyes leaving no doubt about his identity. Naruto-kun, she gasped, almost unable to accept the drastic change that her little brother had undergone in only 3 years. He nodded and was instantly brought back into a hug with the now crying woman. It's so good to see you again, Naruto-kun. Things just haven't been the same since you left. The tall blonde smiled warmly and rubbed the somewhat hysterical woman's back soothingly, whispering comforting words in her ear. The moment was interrupted by the sound of two angry women clearing their throats loudly. Instantly, Naruto's head snapped up and he looked over to see his two companions glaring at him with barely contained rage. Sweat dropping at their murderous looks, he stepped away from the recovered Shizune and rubbed his head sheepishly. Sorry Akai-chan, to Yuya-chan. This is Shizune Ni-chan, she's Ba-chan's assistant and one of my dearest friends. Shizune Ni-chan, this is Akai-chan and to Yuya-chan they're his girlfriends. Tayuya interrupted grumpily. The black-haired woman looked between the two women and Naruto a few times, her mouth open in a shocked gape. Be both, she stuttered. It's a long story. Why don't you come in with us when we explain to Ba-chan, that way you can hear the whole thing? Naruto suggested, walking over to his women and putting an arm around each of them in what he hoped was a placating manner. Shizune gave a nod and they all entered the Hokage's office, not bothering to knock. Who the hell are you? And what do you think you're doing barging in here like that? Tsunade yelled, her tone somehow even grumpier than Naruto remembered, causing him to sweat drop lightly. I'm offended you don't recognize me, surely I haven't changed that much, Ka-san. Naruto said with a fake hurt expression that the woman could only identify thanks to years of dealing with a certain mask-wearing, porn-reading Junin. Naruto-kun, she stammered out, already having left the desk and begun inspecting the tall man, moving faster than any of them thought she was still capable. In the flesh. It's good to see you again, Ka-san. He said with a wide smile. Tsunade said nothing more as she pulled her son into a tight embrace that may have broken bones if it wasn't for his impressive conditioning. He rubbed her back gently as she began to shed tears of joy, holding no shame in her emotional display at seeing her favorite genin back home safely, and apparently having grown into a powerful young man, if his presence and aura were anything to go by. After a few minutes of quiet assurances and soothing words from the younger blonde, Tsunade regained her composure and stepped away from the young man, wiping her eyes clear of tears as she did so. So Naruto-kun, would you mind telling me why you haven't written for 3 years? Or how you grew so much in only 3 years? And who these two people are? Tsunade asked, her stern Hokage voice coming back after a brief absence. Naruto sheepishly rubbed the back of his head and ushered for them all to sit down. It's kind of a long story, but I guess it starts with. Flashback. It had been 6 months since Naruto had left the village hidden in the leaves and, for the most part, things had been uneventful. He had merely been traveling from town to town, seeing the sights, meeting people and generally enjoying his anonymity. That had not been the case today, however. No, today he had been involved in the most desperate, terrifying battle of his life, and he had only just survived. But it was not thanks to his own merits that he had survived. Sure, his newfound prowess with his blood manipulation was helpful, but he owed his existence to one being, the Kyuubi. Had it not been for his tenant, the 12-year fiasco that was Naruto Uzumaki's life would have come to an end. Deciding that he was not going to be an ungrateful vessel, Naruto began to meditate, using a technique he had discovered to bring himself into the domain of his powerful prisoner. After only a few minutes, the boy found himself in the somewhat familiar tunnels of his mind, ankle deep in that unidentified liquid that he had never gotten around to asking about. Shrugging thoughts of the suspicious fluid out of his mind, Naruto wandered down the paths, following the simultaneously intimidating and comforting sound of the demon's heavy breathing. Hey Fox, he greeted as he entered the large cavern that housed the cage of his prisoner. What do you want, human? The enormous fox growled. Relax. I just wanted to say thanks for helping me out back there. I'd have been done if it wasn't for you. Naruto explained, giving a respectful bow that made the ancient demon raise an eyebrow, or whatever it had instead of eyebrows. Foolish child. If you had died, I would have gone with you. Besides, I always appreciate the chance to punish you pathetic cretins. The Kyuubi laughed. Punish? What are you talking about? Naruto asked, confused by the demon's choice of words. Before I was sealed into your disgusting little body, I was a servant of Kami, and it was my job to seek out and punish those that had been deemed particularly vile, or acting in opposition of Kami's laws. Did you not ever wonder why I attacked your village? Naruto paused to consider this. Truthfully, he had never thought about the reason why Kyuubi would have attacked his village. It never seemed important, but now that he thought about it, it did matter. Honestly, I never did. Everyone just assumed you were some mindless beast looking for destruction. He replied sheepishly. Foolish humans, always overlooking the important details in favor of the simplest answer. And you wonder why we call you stupid. The demon muttered as it shook its large head. Hey, with all the shit those dumbass villagers put me through, I'm exactly inclined to disagree, but there are some good people out there. Naruto defended. Perhaps. But, I maintain that the vast majority of your kind are barely above the mindless beasts you call demons. I don't understand, aren't you a demon? Naruto asked, once again confused by the fox. Kyuubi let loose a barking laugh. You humans truly know nothing of the world surrounding you. There are 4 levels of immortals in this world. The lowest are what are commonly known as demons. These are mostly mindless beasts that wander around, causing mayhem and destruction, possessing humans and the like. Next, there are the greater demons. These are similar to the lower level kind, but are capable of conscious thought and are usually much more powerful. An example of one of these was Morio, who attacked a country not far from here a few years ago and was sealed by a local priestess. Above them are the demon lords, such as myself and the other Biju, though personally I always thought Shukaku shouldn't have been counted as one of us, the chubby psycho. Naruto cleared his throat, bringing the demon lord out of its mutterings. Anyway, then above us is Kami, who is supremely powerful and can never be defeated blah blah blah. Mind you, that lazy bastard hasn't done anything in more than a millennium, always making us do his dirty work. Naruto's sweat dropped at the sight of an immortal fox bitching about its boss like a whiny teenager. He cleared his throat again, bringing the fox back to the topic at hand. Oh, and there used to be another level in between us and Kami, the demon royalty, but they were wiped out millennia ago, when they tried to overthrow the big boss. Dumbasses. Even if he never does anything, everyone knows you don't screw with the guy that made you, that's just common sense. I see. But, what does this have to do with why you attacked Konoha? Naruto asked. The fox paused for a moment, then let out another barking laugh. Nothing actually. I guess I got a bit sidetracked. It answered simply, causing Naruto to face vault in classic anime style. So why did you attack Konoha? He asked impatiently. I didn't. Well, not at first. I was sent to take out a few people in your village that had been toying with Kami's laws, trying to gain immortality and a few other things humans were never meant to mess with. Now usually, if it was only a few weak mortals, I would have gone in my human form and done it quietly, but some of the lower demons had been pissing me off recently, so I went in my true form. Naturally, when your stupid villagers saw a gigantic fox heading towards them with an apparent intent to kill, they didn't bother asking questions, they just assumed I was going to kill them all and they attacked me. Being that I was already pissed off and they were stopping me from completing my objective, I kinda retaliated. And the rest is history. I killed a few hundred of the ninja, then that blonde bastard appeared out of nowhere. Next thing I know, there is a bright flash of light and I'm stuck in this dump. Naruto gaped at the blasé-looking demon. So you killed hundreds of people and ruined my life, because you were pissed off at some lower demons that had been annoying you. The shocked boy yelled. Well, when you put it like that, I sound like a total, but yeah, that's the basic gist of it. To be fair though, if the people I killed were anything like the ignorant bastards that have been torturing you all these years, they got what was coming to them. Kyuubi replied defensively. Okay. Well, thanks for the help and the, interesting history lesson. But I'll just be on my way. Naruto said as he started to leave his mindscape. Sure thing, little one. drop by if you ever want to chat. The fox declared in an eerily chirpy tone. For the next few months, Naruto continued his travels, continually working on increasing his control over his blood ability. In one of his, increasingly common discussions with his tenant, the Kyuubi had suggested that he try keeping the blood attached to his body, so he wouldn't have to keep cutting himself whenever he wanted to use it. Naruto had agreed it was a good idea, but had quickly learned that if he didn't keep the blood in near constant motion, it would dry out and he would be left, caked in a useless rusty brown crust. It had taken him a few weeks to be able to do it subconsciously, but once he did, it proved to be incredibly useful, since it not only made the blood more readily available, but it also served as control training, as he would often practice changing the properties of his weapon, shifting it between its completely liquid and hardened, almost metallic, states. He had found, during an experimentation session, that he could get the blood to take almost any form or quality, so long as it was attached to him. As soon as the connection was severed, it would revert to its natural, fluid state. This was disappointing as it meant that he couldn't use it as a projectile, and if someone ever managed to get the blood away from him, it would be useless. During his next chat with the Kyuubi, they had discussed this development, and decided that he could avoid the projectile limitation by simply increasing his volume of blood, then he would be able to stretch it much further, increasing his range and reducing the need for projectiles. So, under the supervision and advisement of his demonic companion, he had begun bloodletting, as much was safe, and had managed to drastically increase his blood stock, as he'd begun referring to it. This increased capacity brought with it another issue. Previously, when not in use, the blood would remain under his clothes, a sort of second skin that wasn't visible from the outside. Now though, there was far too much to be spread over the hidden sections of his body without making it quite thick and making him look rather misshapen, with a torso and legs, but lean arms and head. Once again, it was one of his conversations with the Kyuubi that provided the answer. The fox had jokingly suggested that the blood was similar to its fur and that he should simply go all natural, and while he had initially disregarded the idea as another of the strangely childish fox's jokes, he had realized that it actually wasn't that bad an idea and had abruptly left the mindscape to test his theory. He was pleased to find that, after a few failed attempts, he could actually form the blood into what looked and felt just like real clothes, albeit they had to be red since he couldn't manage to change its color, like he could everything else about it. After experimenting with his newfound ability, Naruto finally decided on making only his top out of the liquid, and leaving the rest of his outfit, real clothes, since he didn't want to be caught without pants if he lost his concentration sometime. As the time passed, however, and his store increased even further, he was forced to make additions to his outfit. He started with smaller items, like gloves and sandals, then a mask like Kakashi's, but eventually he simply had too much and was forced to take the final step, replacing his pants, though he always wore real underwear, just in case the worst happened. He had found, much to his surprise, that he felt far more comfortable when wearing his blood clothes than he had ever been in real clothes, almost as if it was only natural for him. Kyuubi suggested it must be a part of his ancestry, since the feeling he described was similar to when it returned to its true form after being in human form for a while. Whilst the idea that this was his natural form intrigued Naruto, he had no way of knowing if it was related to his ancestry, since he had no idea who his ancestors were. Flashback pause. Wait, does that mean that the clothes you are wearing now are all made of blood too? Tsunade interrupted. Naruto nodded as his cloak and top reverted back to their blood shapes and formed into a set of giant bat wings off his back, leaving his muscled torso exposed to the hungry eyes of Akai, Tayuya and, surprisingly, Shizune. Well, that answers that. Tsunade muttered, throwing a book at her drooling assistant. Anyway, so after that, flashback continued. Another few months passed without much of an event, aside from Naruto having to adapt his clothes to facilitate more storage. That is, until the night of October 10th, Naruto's birthday and the 13th anniversary of the Kyuubi's attack on Konoha. Having been overcome by painful memories of birthdays past, Naruto had sought the company of the being that had become the boy's dearest and closest friend, the Kyuubi. When he walked the familiar pathways of his mind, however, something was noticeably different. At first the boy couldn't identify what it was, but after a few moments it struck him, he couldn't hear his friend's deep, soothing breaths. Alarmed and afraid that somehow, something had happened to his companion, Naruto frantically sprinted through the corridors till he found himself in the Kyuubi's chamber, only now, there was no sign of the demon lord, only a tremendous, empty cage. Ignoring the nagging voice in the back of his mind that warned it might be a trap, Naruto quickly passed through the enormous gate's bars and found himself, for the first time, inside the cell of his prisoner. It had been an unspoken rule throughout the growth of their friendship, that they wouldn't mention either of them entering or exiting the cage, since both knew that it would disrupt the fragile trust that had been built between them. And, since it was always so dark, the blonde boy had never seen inside of the cell that his friend was forced to live in, and now, he almost wished that it had stayed that way. It was completely bare, containing nothing that could be considered a comfort or source of entertainment, just hard, wet, stone floors, walls and ceiling. There was absolutely nothing in the enormous space. Except for a small, hunched figure in one of the corners. Taking more notice of the, now screaming, voice in the back of his mind, Naruto approached the figure cautiously, inwardly cursing the lack of light as he couldn't make out the form's features. In obvious response to his thought, an ethereal light swelled in the room, bathing everything in gentle glow, like a candle or fireplace in a dark room. The figure, now revealed to be a beautiful, red-headed woman, flinched at the appearance of the light and spun around to face the surprised Naruto, who couldn't help but stare at the woman's angelic form and 9 long, fur-covered tails. Kyuubi, he sputtered disbelievingly. Naruto-kun, she gasped before wrapping her tails around herself for some level of modesty, though it didn't help much as it just made her look more alluring to the shocked teen. What the hell? Naruto asked dumbly, unable to form his frantic thoughts into a more complex question. So, this is my human form, surprise. The woman joked with a nervous chuckle. Naruto just continued to gape at her, his previous question being the most his rebooting mind was capable of. I guess you're a little surprised that I'm a woman, huh? She asked, getting a stiff nod from the blonde, who had finally managed to close his mouth. Why? He asked, after regaining more of his consciousness back. Why didn't I tell you? Well, when you first came in, I thought you were going to be like every other ignorant human, so I figured it would be better to deal with you in my fox form, even though this is my natural body. In truth, I only used the fox form when I was trying to intimidate people or in a particularly nasty battle. 90% of the time, I chose to stay in this form. Do you have any idea how hard it is to live as a 100-foot-tall fox? Normal things like walking around or taking a bath are hell, so I usually stayed like this. But then we started to become friends and I was afraid you would be angry if you found out I've been lying to you this whole time. She said sadly, hanging her head. Naruto smiled and walked over to the gorgeous woman, pulling her into a comforting embrace. And you call us humans stupid? What part of having an unbelievably beautiful woman as my best friend was I supposed to be angry about? This is actually a huge relief. For the last couple of months I'd been worried I was turning gay or whatever it is when you like animals, since I keep having these dreams and fantasies of us in a relationship. Naruto explained with a light chuckle. You're serious? She asked in a surprised tone. Of course. I thought you could read my thoughts. I assumed you knew. No, all the seal lets me do is monitor what is happening right now on the outside. Aside from that and sending my chakra to heal or strengthen you, I can't do anything from in here. She explained. Kami, that must be boring. No wonder you're always trying to get me to come in here and talk to you. Naruto exclaimed. Kyuubi pulled back from the embrace and looked away from her container shyly. Actually, that's only part of it. I really like spending time with you. She admitted sheepishly. Wait, as in, that's right, I like you too. She interrupted. Naruto gaped at the beautiful woman again, unable to comprehend what she had just confessed. As in like? He asked, getting a frustrated sigh from the woman, who suddenly turned back to him and locked him in a passionate kiss. Does that answer your question? She asked with a smirk, as she saw his flustered expression. I don't know, you might have to do it again, Kyuubi-chan. He replied with a matching smirk as he snapped out of his daze. Her grin only widened at his playful statement and she leaned back into his body. Well, if I have to. And for the record, my name is Akai, not Kyuubi. She declared before pulling him into another world-shattering kiss. Flashback pause. Tsunade and Shizune gaped at the people in front of them, though they were looking at different people. You kissed the Kyuubi, Tsunade yelled, but she was drowned out by Shizune's even louder scream. Akai-san is the Kyuubi. She shrieked, drawing her master's attention before it shifted back to Naruto and his female companions. Yes, but can you keep it down? We're trying to keep it a secret. He replied sternly. Would you mind telling me what the hell you were thinking starting a relationship with her? And why and how she is not sealed inside of you? Tsunade asked, and, though she kept her voice level, everyone could feel the anger radiating off her. Calm down, Tsunade-san. I assure you I mean you no harm, and even if I did, Naru-kun is more than powerful enough to restrain me. Akai assured, calming the Hokage considerably. Is that true, Naruto-kun? Are you more powerful than she is? The blonde Kunoichi asked. Naruto nodded seriously. It's a byproduct of how Akai-chan was released, you see. Flashback continued. It had been 3 months since Naruto had begun his relationship with his tenant, and in that time they had grown considerably closer, emotionally. You can't get closer physically than literally living inside the one you love. As they often did, the couple was passing the time lying on the grassy hills that populated the redesigned cage of the Demon Lord, simply enjoying each other's company. It sucks we can't do this in the real world. Naruto grumbled, realizing that he would have to leave soon, lest he risk someone finding him and proclaiming him to be in a coma, as had happened quite a few times since their relationship began. True, but we both know the only way for that to happen is if I were somehow let out, and I don't think that damn Yondaimi's seal is going to let that happen anytime soon. Akai replied, snuggling deeper into her man's side as she too realized their time was almost up. That's it. We can remove the seal. Naruto exclaimed, sitting up abruptly and accidentally throwing his love off him. You know we can't do that. We don't know what would happen. We could both die, or even if we didn't, who knows what the influx of demonic chakra would do to you. It's not worth the risk. The redhead reprimanded as she stood up, dusting off the kimono she wore despite Naruto's complaints. Naruto had let the matter drop, or so it seemed, as 3 days later, Akai woke as her entire domain began to quake and fluctuate wildly, as if it was unstable. Quickly guessing what the problem was, she raced to where the manifestation of the seal was now located and was horrified to find Naruto, writhing in agony on the ground, the torn piece of paper clutched in his hand. Naru-kun, she screamed as she ran over to his side, wrapping him up in a tight embrace to try and give him some comfort from the obviously excruciating pain. What the hell were you thinking? She yelled as he continued to convulse and tremble. I finally found it again. He muttered before he passed out from the pain, leaving the terrified demoness to cry and pray as everything began to fade. Naruto awoke abruptly 2 weeks later to find himself enveloped in the comforting feeling that he had searched almost a year to find. Turning his head, he was delighted to find the sleeping form of the woman he loved laying next to him, her lithe body draped over his, giving him that indescribable feeling of security and warmth that came from being with the one he loved and who loved him. He had recognized the feeling the first time that he and his tenant had embraced. It was the same one that had soothed him, however briefly, during his fight with the Anbu. And now that he had it back, he vowed on his very soul that he would not let anything take that feeling away again, no matter what the cost. So when he had realized that he had an opportunity to set the being that gave him that feeling free, he didn't hesitate for a moment, regardless of the possible costs to himself. He smiled warmly as he saw the sleeping beauty begin to stir, shifting slightly so that they were eye to eye when her ruby-red orbs finally opened. "Morning, Akai-chan," he said softly, before yelping in pain as she whacked him over the head. "You stupid son of a bitch. What the hell were you thinking removing the seal without even telling me? I could have helped you prepare for it better, you dumb bastard," she yelled, getting into the mount position and thumping him repeatedly on the chest, or at least she would have, but she found herself completely restrained by vine-like appendages of blood that extended from the blonde's chest. Absently, he noted that his blood had not reacted by itself since that fight where his demon love had saved him, and wondered why it was doing so now, but shrugged it off when he noticed the half-furious, half-concerned look that Akai was giving him. "I know you are upset, Akai-chan, but I am not going to apologize because I don't regret what I did. Since my blood is here and so are you, that means that you are on the outside, and, since I don't see Cammy yelling at you for slacking at your job, I know we aren't dead. Which means that you are free and we got away without any serious consequences," he declared with a proud smile, that quickly faded when he saw her look away from him. "What's the matter?" he asked, ordering his blood to release its hold on his girlfriend. "That's not entirely true," she muttered softly. Naruto gently turned her head to face his and leant in, giving her a chaste, but loving kiss. "Whatever has or will happen, is worth it for this moment," he declared tenderly. She gave a weak smile, but Naruto could tell that she was forcing it. "What is this terrible thing that is so bad that it would ruin such a perfect moment?" he asked. The red-headed woman sighed and gazed deeply into his eyes. "There were some complications." "Like what?" Naruto asked, curious, but obviously not worried. "After you removed the seal, my chakra began flooding your system, as we knew it would, but your reaction was more intense than I had anticipated. I managed to retain a little less than half of my power as I was ejected from your body, but the rest of it was almost enough to kill you. If I had taken any less, you would have died, regardless of your special circumstances," she explained gravely. Naruto creased his brows in confusion. "What circumstances?" Akai let out another sigh before taking a calming breath. "Your body, unlike a normal human's, was not shredded by the excess of demonic chakra. The only reason that I can think for this would be if you had some kind of natural tolerance for it, and the only way for that to be true is, if you have powerful demonic ancestry." "What? You mean one of my ancestors was a demon?" he asked, surprised by the coincidental information. "Yes. But not just any demon. The only way that you would be able to handle my level of demonic chakra, would be if the demon was at least as powerful as me." "Wait, but that means that it had to be either Cammy or you. You're my ancestor. Oh, that is fucked up." Deeply disturbed by his feelings for his great-grandmother. "Me? No, I've never, with a human, so it couldn't be me," she assured, getting a relieved sigh from the panicked teen. "But if it wasn't you, doesn't that mean that it has to be Cammy? That lazy bastard. Please, he's too lazy even to do that, besides, he's above such pleasures, or at least that's what he'd like to think. I happen to know that he has a terrible weakness for." "Focus. You were trying to explain something to me, remember?" Naruto interrupted, making the woman blush slightly at getting distracted, again. "Right, sorry, No, what I was thinking was that it would have to have been one of the demon royalty. They were always resistant to Kami's rules, so it's not surprising that they would have a few human descendants running around. Oh, I see. But what does any of this really matter? I mean, it's not like I'm a demon, so I can't be royalty, right? Naruto's cheerful grin died when she once again looked away from him. Actually, that's what I was getting to. When my demonic chakra overloaded your system, it apparently awakened your ancient demonic heritage, transforming you into a full demon. Akai explained fearfully, terrified of what his possible reaction might be. She was caught completely off guard, however, when he cheered loudly and leapt to his feet, accidentally throwing her to the ground in the process. Ah! What the hell? She yelled in surprise, only her demonic reflexes saving her from landing on her. Sorry, Akai-chan, I just wanted to see if I got any cool tails, or stuff like yours. He explained, rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. I'm not sure. When I woke up we were both in our full human forms, though I have no idea how, so I haven't seen your true form. I doubt it'll be like mine though. The Biju are the only demons that have animal features, the royalty were all completely unique beings. I seem to remember one of them being red and being able to manipulate his body, which is somewhat similar to your blood ability, so maybe he was your ancestor. If that's true, it's probable that you will look like him. Which frankly, would be a good thing. He was probably the most normal looking of them, the rest were freaks with 5 legs and crazy crap like that. She said, striking a thinking pose as she tried to remember the long-lost memories. Well, there's no point in speculating, how do I transform? He asked, clearly eager to see his new form. It's easy, just, oh, I didn't think of that. She said suddenly. What? He asked impatiently. Well, the way I transform is to imagine my other form, then will it to become real. But I don't know what my true form looks like. Naruto exclaimed, getting a nod from the demoness. Well, your ancestor, from what I remember, was completely red, which, assuming his abilities were similar to yours, implies that he covered himself in his blood. Maybe you should try that. She suggested with a shrug. Naruto thought about it for a moment before deciding that it was worth a try. He tried to focus on his blood as he used to, and was pleased to find that it worked much faster and much easier, though it caught him off guard at first since he was suddenly being swallowed by the crimson liquid. Stifling a scream as it crept further up his face than ever before, he almost lost composure as it completely covered him, leaving nothing but a scarlet silhouette. After a few moments of nothing happening, he was about to pull it off when he was suddenly overcome with a wave of new sensations as his body began to warp and shift. His bones and muscles began to tear and reform, considerably larger and longer than before. His eyes changed completely, becoming completely white before they flattened and stretched, becoming egg-shaped and roughly the size of his palm. His mouth opened as he let out a scream, only it stretched and widened to the point that he could probably eat a chicken whole. And his teeth all grew, becoming sharper and longer, reminiscent of Akai's in her fox form, only they were all long, not just the canines. Even his tongue changed, becoming much longer and round, till it looked almost like a slimy rat tail. After almost a full minute of the agonizing transformation, it ended and the new, fully demonized Naruto stood panting in front of his shocked love. What happened? He asked, his voice completely different, sounding like a more feral version of Akai's demonic growl. You've finally taken your true form. Akai said. She walked over to him and pulled him into a comforting hug. Everything is different, he gasped as he took in the world through his new senses. His eyesight had changed dramatically. He could now see a much wider range, and everything was in much sharper focus, even things that he wouldn't have been able to see previously, like the individual leaves on a tree that was more than 100 meters away. They also seemed to be drawn to movement, as he suddenly focused sharply on a deer as it leapt out of the tree line into the clearing their camp was set up next to. His senses of smell and hearing were both also greatly improved, and also seemed to focus on particular sensations, as he smelt the deer and heard its heart beating. One thought was heard in the new demon's head as he took in his environment. "I'm a predator," he declared. "That's right. You're a demon now. That means that you are the top of the food chain, and your senses and instincts are programmed as such. But you must learn to control those instincts. If you do not, you will become no better than the mindless beasts of the lowest levels." Naruto nodded his head, fighting the powerful urge to slaughter the innocent animal. Slowly, he turned his head towards his love, but this proved to be a mistake as he was almost overcome with even more powerful urges. One by one his senses locked on to her and he was nearly overcome by it all. Her heavenly, animalistic scent, the glistening sweat that trailed down her gorgeous curves, the strangely enticing sound of her strong, calm heartbeat, he felt for the first time that he was truly noticing her, and it was pushing him over the edge. Noticing that his intense study seemed to be locked onto herself, Akai didn't have to struggle to guess at what was happening. "Fight it, Naru-kun. You aren't an animal, you're better than this," she declared, but even the movement of her lips and the glimpses of her sweet tongue were too much and the new demon let out a mighty roar before stalking towards, what his instincts were loudly declaring, his mate. Now being that she was far more experienced and composed than the young man approaching her, she could have overcome their power discrepancy and restrained him, but for the life of her, she couldn't find the will. She wanted this just as badly as he did, and she was sick of fighting her instincts when it came to the man that had wholly claimed her heart. So instead of continuing the charade of disinterest, she reverted to her own demonic form, letting out a howl of reply as her teeth, nails and ears became beastly and she sprouted 4 wildly swinging tails, shredding her robe in the process. His mouth hung open as his heightened senses took in all that was Akai, easily the single most beautiful creature the world had ever known, her perfect, pert, her tiny rose-colored nipples, her tight, flat stomach, her flashback pause. "Okay, I don't think we need to hear any more about that part of the story," Tsunade declared, ignoring the disappointed groans from the 3 other women in the room. "Ah, right. Sorry Ka-san. Okay. So it was about a week later that we got control." "A week," Tsunade yelled, sparing only a glance to her apprentice, who had fainted with a perverted grin and nosebleed. "What can I say? Demons do it right," Akai declared proudly, getting a shake of the head from Tsunade. "Anyway, so what happened next?" the Hokage asked, not comfortable with the inappropriate thoughts this conversation was digging up about her son. "Well, like I said, it was about a week later." Flashback continue. Having finally regained control of their urges, they decided that they needed to spend time exploring and mastering any new abilities that the transformation may have given the blonde. They had discovered that in his full demon form, as they had labeled it, it was as if his entire body was composed purely of blood. This meant that he could manipulate his entire body, not just the blood that covered it, as he was limited previously. The implications of this trait were not lost on either of them, and they spent almost an entire day exploring everything that this meant for the new demon. They had started with simple things, like extending his fingers, then arms, but had quickly moved right up to completely reshaping his body. He found that he could essentially transform into anything. Now this may not sound too impressive considering one of the most basic ninjutsu is the henge technique, but unlike the henge, which is just an illusion, Naruto could physically change into anything. This meant that he could transform into a bird, and actually be able to fly, or into a fish and actually be able to breathe underwater. Granted it would be a red fish of roughly his dimensions with weird eyes, but still. They also found that he had near-perfect regenerative ability, since as long as it was still attached to his body, he could merely reshape the damaged part without the damage, and on the off chance that something was actually severed from his body, if he re-established physical contact with it, he could absorb it back into his body and reform whatever was removed. Whilst Naruto had taken this knowledge to presume that he was immortal, Akai had quickly reminded him that they had not tried removing his head, and it was possible that doing so would likely kill even him. He had replied by absorbing his head into his body and dancing around like a headless idiot, inwardly shouting about how he was immortal. After she had regained his attention by whacking him where his head used to be, he calmed down and she explained that, whilst demons may be very hard to kill, they are not immortal, so he should not become careless. He promised to do so and retracted his head again, into what he had jokingly labeled his defensive mode. It was a few days later when the demonic couple had decided to move on. Deciding that it was best to travel in their human forms, they each transformed, but as the blood skin pulled away from Naruto's head, they were surprised to find that he did not revert back to his previous size, but instead only shrank slightly, to a 6-foot-tall muscular man, not quite as large as the 6'5" demon form, but considerably taller than his pre-demon self. Shrugging it off as a good thing, they decided why it didn't really matter, and set off on their way. As short time later, they found themselves in a small village, sitting in a restaurant eating a quiet meal, when they overheard an interesting conversation. "Did you hear that the last Uchiha has left Konoha?" A random civilian asked the man next to him, instantly gaining the attention of the demon couple that were sitting nearby. "It's not really surprising after what that crazy bitch of a Hokage did to him. I heard that she had his bloodline and chakra sealed, so that he couldn't be a ninja anymore, then she had him locked up. Can you imagine doing that to the last Uchiha, and just cause he tried to save them from some demon that had been attacking the villagers? I tell you, this is why they should never have let a woman into a position with that much power, they're too easily swayed." The second man declared with a disgusted shake of his head. Flashback pause. "He said what?" Tsunade yelled as she stood, slamming her fist into her desk and almost splitting it in half. "Easy, Ka-san, I handled the situation," Naruto declared with a sadistic smirk. Flashback continue. Naturally, after the comments about his mother, Akai was forced to physically restrain her blonde lover from literally ripping the stupid man apart, but after his statement, her grip somehow slipped and the full fury of the new demon was unloaded on the fat little man. After a few minutes, when there was little more than a red smudge where the man once sat, Akai decided that he had had enough. Grabbing her man by his blood-coated arm, she pulled him over to where the man's companion sat, quivering in a puddle of his excrement and his friend's entrails. "Now, if you would be so kind as to tell me where the little Uchiha traitor went, I would appreciate that greatly." Akai purred, causing the shocked man to stare at her intently, the faintest hint of lust apparent in his disgusted gaze, but it was more than enough. Before he knew what had happened, his body was covered up to the neck in what appeared to be a giant fist made of blood that jerked him into the air, slamming him into the ceiling before beginning to constrict, cutting off his air and cracking several bones. "Naru-kun, you can't kill him yet, we need to know where the Uchiha went so we can pay him a visit." The demoness cooed as she put a calming hand on her demonic love. Naruto looked back at her, his human form's blue eyes gazing intently into her blood-red ones. "Fine, but the next guy to look at you like that is getting squished. I've always wanted to see why Gaara liked that technique so much," the blonde declared as he pulled back his blood, sending it back to his body where it reformed the cloak he had started wearing since the demonization had nearly doubled his store. "Now, where did he go?" Akai asked again, fighting back a snigger at seeing not a trace of lust in the man's eyes. He went to Otogakure. The Otokage sent his personal bodyguards to break him out of prison and escort him back to the village. Apparently all of them were killed when the Hokage sent out a squad of the Uchiha's classmates after him. They all came back heavily wounded and empty-handed however, so everyone assumed that he got away. The man replied, forcibly getting rid of the nervous stutter when he saw that it seemed to anger the strange beauty in front of him. So the Baka Tem actually went to the snake. I guess we should go pay them a visit, Akai-chan. Naruto asked with a grin that made the terrified civilian faint. After a few weeks of travel and some advanced interrogation of a few Oto nin they stumbled across, the demonic couple finally found themselves at the entrance to the bunker that currently contained Orochimaru and his latest love SLA, apprentice. So, what do you reckon, Akai-chan? Silent and stealthy, or loud and nasty? Naruto asked as he looked over the inconspicuous hole in the ground that was the entrance to Otogakure. The ancient demoness struck a thoughtful pose for a few moments before grinning widely. You know that stealthy was never my style, and it certainly isn't yours, let's go loud and nasty. She declared as she shifted to her true form, gaining a wicked grin from her lover as he did the same. Man, that feels better. I totally get what you meant when you said it sucks to be a human, I feel so weak in that form. Naruto declared as he rolled his joints, though it was impossible for them to become stiff in this form. Akai just smirked as she too stretched her new appendages. Told ya. Now let's get to this. If I'm forced to look at that of yours much longer, we're gonna get distracted again. She purred as she leapt into the hole, a chorus of quick screams rising shortly after. Music to my ears. Naruto sang as he shifted his form slightly before following after her, not wanting to get his ample frame stuck in the narrow tunnel. His feet hit ground after a short fall and his impressive demonic eyes revealed a small tunnel, currently containing his love and 2 dead Chunin. You didn't save one for me. He whined, a strangely terrifying sound considering his demonic voice. You can have the next ones. She replied, somewhat disturbed by his vicious mouth pouting. Yay. He squealed like a teenage girl, a big, red, demonic teenage girl. Shaking her head at his silly antics, she pointed down one of the 3 passageways. That one has the Uchiha's scent. Naruto's foolish childlike persona was instantly replaced with that of a seasoned warrior as he stopped jumping and gave her a serious nod, before starting down the tunnel. After a few minutes and a few more pathetic guards, they found a large steel door which the Uchiha's scent disappeared behind. This must be the Tem's room. The snake would want the best security on his precious Sasuke-kun. Kami, the similarities between him and the Konoha Council are disgusting. Naruto muttered as 2, 3-foot-long blades sprouted from each of his forearms, the sharp edge running from past his elbow to a foot past his fingertips, where they ended in a vicious serrated curve. Without delay, he slammed his fists into the top of the door, the 4 blades penetrating the thick steel like water. He then dragged his hands downwards, till they met the floor, leaving the heavy door sitting in 5 strips, the middle ones falling limply forward as their support was severed. Well, that was unnecessarily flashy. Akai said flatly as the heavy doors fell with a loud crash. You know me, I like to make an entrance. Naruto replied with a grin as he stepped through the hole. As soon as he passed through the doorway, the sound of 1,000 birds chirping erupted in the demon's ears and he felt a burning sensation in his abdomen. Looking down, Naruto found the, now, relatively small form of his former teammate, the Uchiha's hand up to the elbow in the red flesh of his body. Well, hello to you too, Tem. Naruto growled, not looking bothered by the limb embedded in his torso. What the hell are you? Sasuke shrieked as he tried to pull his arm back, only to find that the strange red flesh was gripping onto his arm, holding him firmly in place. Now this is a familiar scene. Isn't this what happened the last time you tried that attack on a demon? Of course that was just the weakling Ikibi, but still, you can't help but laugh at the symmetry, hey Tem. Naruto laughed, his demonic voice sending chills down the spine of the terrified Avenger. How do you know about that? Sasuke asked, managing to keep the fear out of his voice by replacing it with arrogant indifference. You don't recognize me, Tem. I'm hurt. And after all that time we spent together. That mission to Wave, where I saved your. The Forest of Death, where I saved your. The Oto invasion, where I saved your. How about when you tried to kill me before our team meeting a year ago? You really don't remember me, Sasuke Tem. Naruto growled, his killer intent flooding the room and making the young traitor fall to his knees. Naruto. That's right. Now what's this I hear about you turning traitor? Naruto asked, his killer intent increasing even more, forcing the Uchiha to struggle for his breaths. Why you can't kill me? The Sea Council will never let you come be back. Sasuke threatened, though the effect was largely reduced by the fact that he was gasping for every breath and stuttering in terror. You know what? You're right, the demon declared, reining in his killing intent, getting two relieved sighs. Naruto paused, too, he thought as he looked around, searching for the source of the other noise. When he found it, his killer intent flared even more than before, though this time it was focused solely on the Uchiha, the horror of the experience completely overwhelming anything he had felt from Orochimaru or even his brother. In the corner of the room, chained to the wall and completely, was the broken form of a teenage girl. She didn't look much older than 15, but it was hard to tell since her body was littered with cuts and large bruises. From her disheveled and malnourished state, it was easy to tell that she had been there for some time, a few weeks at least. Her hair, which was a paler red than Akai's, was matted and even looked to be burned in some places. In short, the poor girl looked like she had been through hell and back in a cage full of wild beasts, and the one responsible was trembling in front of him, totally defenseless. It would be so easy. Just a simple flick of his wrist and this monster in human flesh would be wiped from the earth. But that wouldn't be justice. There was no justice here. Regardless of what happened to the Uchiha, nothing would repair or compensate the damage that the sick little had done to that poor girl, and Naruto knew it. It was that thought alone that saved Sasuke's life that day, but it didn't save his arm. Without hesitation, Naruto constricted the flesh around the raven-haired traitor's arm, grinding it into complete nothingness, leaving not even a fragment intact as he pulled the 3-inch stump that used to be his right arm away from the furious demon. It took several moments for the truth to set in before he began to scream, his shocked mind overloaded briefly before acknowledging that he was in tremendous pain. Naruto grabbed the shrieking Uchiha by his collar and raised him to eye level, staring silently into the teary, pain-filled eyes of the Avenger before he threw him through the hole in the door and into the wall across the corridor, fracturing his spine but somehow leaving him conscious. Akai, who had been waiting in the hallway and had only narrowly avoided being hit by the flying traitor, poked her head through the door to see what had upset her man so much. After a few moments her eyes settled on the frail form in the corner, and if it wasn't for the maternal instincts that every female, human, demon or animal has, she would have returned to the hall and slaughtered the Uchiha in ways that would make the most depraved nightmares of Orochimaru look like child's play. But as it was, she, instead rushed over the girl's side, effortlessly breaking her restraints, and bringing her into a comforting embrace, thankful that the girl recognized her as a friend and didn't flinch away from the contact as many would have. Carefully, so as to not aggravate her countless wounds, Akai picked the girl up bridal style and turned to her lover. No words were shared between the two, but the look they shared said everything that needed to be said. They were taking the girl with them after they had destroyed this horrible place and everyone in it. Only the Uchiha would survive, but his punishment would far outweigh that given to the rest of those that they came across. And so it was. Akai created a cage bunshin, which left with the girl while the original and her lover slaughtered everyone even close to that compound. When they finally finished, the demoness shifted to her full fox form and leveled the structure, leaving nothing but a smoking crater and the horrible stench of mass murder. Flashback end. The office fell silent as everyone thought about what had been said. The only one who moved was Naruto as he pulled the trembling form of Tayuya into a comforting embrace, rubbing her back and whispering into her ear words that no one else could hear. The girl, it was her. Tsunade asked quietly, getting a nod from Akai, who was also rubbing the young woman's back. After a few minutes, Tayuya regained her composure and Naruto spoke up again, clasping her hand as she pulled away from him. After that, we brought the Uchiha back here, though with a few modifications, as I'm sure you know. Naruto declared, looking at his mother who gave a serious nod. So it really was you that did that to him. We had thought he had gone mad when we found him, missing his arms, eyes and reproductive organs, ranting about how demons stole his vengeance. Tsunade explained, if I had known what the sick bastard had done, I never would have saved him. Saved him? Akai asked. Tsunade fought back an angry growl. The council forced me to perform several transplants, giving him the latest prosthetics arms from Suna, and they even made me give him Kakashi's Sharingan, saying that it should be with one who truly deserved it, whatever that is supposed to mean. I fought tooth and nail against it, but Kakashi actually agreed to the transfer, something about a guilty conscience from way back, so I didn't really have any excuse not to do it. Especially considering we were told that he had been captured and held as a prisoner by Orochimaru. Had I known the truth, I'd have let the bastard wander around blind and armless. At least that filthy bloodline will die with him. Naruto spat, his opinion regarding the Uchiha clan as a whole well established to all those present. Tsunade gave a slight nod. Not that it has stopped the stupid bastards from trying. They even put the CRA into effect on him, and got him married to the Yamanaka girl and some of the other whiny bitches of your age group, 7 in total. And not one of them would listen to me when I said that he was damaged beyond repair in that area. Stupid fangirls, serves them right. She muttered, getting nods of agreement from everyone present and conscious, since Shizune was still passed out on the floor in a lusty haze. So what happened after you dropped the prick off? Tsunade asked, getting back on track. Well, after we had given Tayuya-chan. Wait, your name is Tayuya, as in the same Tayuya that was part of the Odo 4 and took Sasuke and put up the barrier that stopped anyone from helping the Sandame. Tsunade yelled, recognizing the girl from the description Shikamaru and Tamari had given after they returned from the failed retrieval mission. That's right, and I'm sorry for what I did, but I had no choice. Orochimaru would have killed me if I refused an order, and I was given to the Uchiha after I was defeated by that blonde bitch from Suna and that lazy with a pineapple head. The fiery redhead replied, before the Hokage leapt to her feet and made to charge her. Before she even took the first step, however, Tsunade found herself being hugged restrained by the impressively powerful arms of her son. I can't let you hurt her, Ka-san. Tayuya-chan may have done some horrible things, but they were not by her choice and she has already paid more than enough her mistakes. I love her, and I will not allow anyone to hurt her, even you. He declared firmly as the irate blonde woman struggled fruitlessly against his grasp. After a few moments, the words sunk in and the Hokage stopped struggling and took a deep, calming breath. You're right. Even after what she did, she has suffered enough. She stated as she walked back to her chair and sat down. Now, what is this about you loving her? I thought you were with Akai-san. Tsunade asked, barely remembering the demoness' true name. I am and I do. After Tayuya-chan had been traveling with us for a few months, we started to grow close and eventually fell in love. Naturally, it was a bit difficult at first, but we've gotten used to it, and now we're just a big happy family, right, ladies? Naruto asked, throwing an arm around each of his women, who both smiled and shook their heads at his childish enthusiasm. I see. Is there anything else I should know about? Tsunade asked wearily. The emotionally turbulent and excessive number of shocks had taken their toll on the aging woman. Not really. For the last year or so we just traveled around, doing odd jobs here and there. Nothing too exciting, Naruto replied, getting a nod from his mother. Well, that's good. Why don't we call it a day? You three come back tomorrow and we can look into getting you citizenship and a few other things that I have to give you. The blonde Hokage said as she gave her son one more hug before walking them to the door. Sure thing, Ka-san, we'll see you then. Oh, by the way, you wouldn't happen to know where the Tem would be, would you? I think we should pay him a little visit. Naruto asked with a sadistic smirk that was quickly matched by the women around him. That sounds lovely. He's usually at your team's old training grounds. The council forced Kakashi to be his private tutor, so that he can get the power to avenge his clan, and all that shit. They spend most of the. She trailed off when she realized that the three people in front of her had cracked up laughing. What? She asked, not seeing the joke. You remember that really nasty fight that I had where Akai-chan saved me and we started to become friends? Naruto asked, getting a nod from his mother. I was fighting Itachi and Kisame. I managed to catch Kisame by surprise with a blood blade. But then Itachi used Tsukuyomi on me. But it backfired, and he ended up in Akai's cage. The look on his face before she crushed him was priceless. Naruto declared as they all started laughing. Wait, so you mean he's been training non-stop for the last year, and the guy he wants to kill has been dead for 3 years? Oh, you have to let me be there when you tell him. The look on his face is guaranteed to be incredible. Tsunade declared as she realized what they were saying. It's a deal, Ka-san. For now though, we just wanna have some fun with him. See you tomorrow, he yelled as he led his lovers out of the office, all of them sporting wicked grins. Why didn't you tell him? A voice called out after Tsunade had closed the door. The blonde turned around to find her assistant glaring at her, though the effect was reduced by the trail of dry blood from her nose. I'll tell him tomorrow. I wanted them to have one peaceful day in the village before everything goes to shit.